Mean Gene Okerlund has passed away at the age of 76, and wow. I mean, first of all, this comes as a complete shock to me. Mean Gene Okerlund has been a frequent guest here on Busted Open throughout the years, and I think we all remember him in our youth when we first fell in love with pro wrestling. Some of the great interviews that he had, you know, with Hogan, Randy Savage, Roddy Piper, and we've lost Gene Okerlund at the age of 76, Bully.
You know, despite the fact that we've broken a lot of really sad news on the show about wrestlers and people in the wrestling business passing away, I always go back to my last memory that I have of any particular person that we talk about. And I'm very saddened to hear about the loss of Mean Gene, because all of my interactions with him have been so positive, and he was such a gentleman, funny, telling me old stories, and really, Mean Gene was really one of the boys. And Dave, my last memory of Gene was, and you were actually with me at the Hall of Fame just this year. After the Hall of Fame ceremony, once we got back to the hotel, I walked into the bar of the hotel to go meet up with my family to have dinner, and I saw Gene sitting at the bar, and he motioned over to me, and he was having dinner, and he, you know, had some very complimentary things to say, bought me a drink, said congratulations on the Hall of Fame. I shook his hand and told him I would, you know, see him later on in the night. That's my last memory of Mean Gene. So on a sad day, I have a very positive last memory. He was great no matter where he was in the wrestling business. And some of the most entertaining stuff I've ever seen him do was in the WWE with guys like Bobby Heenan. But sad to hear about the loss of Gene.
Yeah, and you know, like you mentioned, AWA, WWF, WCW. I mean, who can forget the interview he did with Hogan after Hogan turned and became part of the NWO? But, you know, and thanks to you, I was a guest at that Hall of Fame ceremony, and just like you, the last time I had any interaction with Mean Gene was at that Hall of Fame ceremony, and I had, before the ceremony, you know, before we got onto the buses to go to the arena, I had a nice conversation with him, but it was my wife, Violetta, who had a very long conversation with Gene Okerlund. And, you know, my wife had no idea who Mean Gene Okerlund was and the legacy and what he's given to the business. It was just an amazing man, just being just a gentleman with my wife. And gosh, I mean, all these, you know, and the man was only 76. He was still very young, Bully. You think about how long he was involved in pro wrestling, how many decades, you know, the 70s, the 80s, into the 90s, that he was such a big part of what we've seen with the landscape of pro wrestling. And man, this is a tough one. Because that's going to be the last memory. Is not a phone conversation I had with him or an interview on this show where he wasn't present. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that both you and I were in his presence. This one definitely hurts.
Well, it definitely hurts, Dave. I mean, I look at death in a different way than a lot of people do. Death is a part of life. It just, you know, I had a mom who suffered from cancer, and we watched her, you know, slowly deteriorate over 3 years. And I had a dad who passed away suddenly from a heart attack. So either way, you know, it's a very difficult thing to deal with. We didn't know that Gene was sick. We have no idea what was wrong with him. And 76, yeah, still relatively young.
Yeah.
Probably had some, you know, real strong years left in him. Still had all his wits about him. But 76 fun years.
Yes.
Especially in the wrestling business, because no matter where he was always having a drink with the boys, always telling stories with the boys, and always having a good time.
And you know what? We always talk about, you know, when, you know, he left the AWA to go to the WWF, and that was at a time where everybody was leaving the AWA to go to the WWF. Dr. D. David Schultz, Hogan, of course, Bobby the Brain Heenan, Jesse Ventura, Adrian Adonis, they all jumped ship from the AWA to the WWF. But I think the biggest loss in a lot of ways was Gene Okerlund, because seeing him in those early years of the WWF, like when we first started watching, late 83, early 1984, he was kind of the voice for, All-Star Wrestling and Wrestling Challenge and Championship Wrestling. He was kind of the voice for those shows. And, him interviewing a Paul Orndorff and a Roddy Piper, and Hogan at his biggest, when they made that national push, it was, I can always think of, just like I think of, somebody like a Tony Schiavone or a Gordon Solie interviewing Ric Flair. That's Gene Okerlund interviewing Hogan when he first became champion. He was backstage interviewing Hogan. What Alex Metz just played with Gene Okerlund interviewing Andre the Giant, that segment that you could see in the Andre the Giant documentary. He really showed that colorful side of those personalities. He got the best out of those personalities. And some of those interviews, and you can check them out not only on the network but YouTube, like sometimes you could see Gene Okerlund just start laughing by things that Randy Savage and Bobby Heenan and Paul Orndorff were saying, and Greg Valentine. You could tell he had a wonderful sense of humor, and I thought did a great job of bringing out those colorful personalities of those wrestlers on the roster.
Phenomenal job. What he did was he helped get guys over, helped them to tell their stories. And I remember as a kid, Dave, obviously I didn't get to watch the AWA. I read about it in magazines, but when Gene first came over to the WWF, excuse me, I was like, who's this guy? Who's this dweeby looking guy? I had no idea who he was. But as a kid, obviously he grew on me. And then obviously as I became an adult and in the wrestling business, realizing, wow, this guy was the man before he even got to the WWF. So, no matter where he went, I'm glad I got to enjoy him as a fan, as a kid and a teenager and as a young adult coming up, but I'm more happy that I got to interact with him and just enjoy his company as a fellow wrestler and just one of the boys.